It's really hard for me to sing that song without thinking of my dad. I remember the time when we were having a debate here in the building. Some of you might have memory of that event. It was with a group of, I think, Baptists at the time, and they had decided that we weren't worthy of singing with. We declined to sing with them when they played the instrument. So when they came here, and of course there was no instrument, but they decided they wouldn't sing with us. Made an announcement, I think, to that effect. And about that time, my dad led that song. Verse, if you can remember what it said, was especially pointed on that occasion. Let those refuse to sing who never knew our God. And Dad, of course, didn't even smile when he did it, but the rest of us got it. But anyway, it was an enjoyable time. I don't know if you've had opportunity. You should have made it through the people you meet at work, or my goodness, on the internet, you can meet just about anybody and everybody. You should have met some Sabbatarians, Seventh-day Adventists. There's a Seventh-day Church of God. There are Seventh-day Baptists as well. People who practice the observance of the seventh day. And so we want to talk about that just a little bit, but there is really a broader question involved than just which day to worship on, whether the seventh or the first day. This isn't a question about whether the Sabbath was changed from the seventh day to the first day, which an awful lot of Sabbatarians want to argue about. It's a broader question about whether the law of God was changed. Are there two testaments? Was that first testament annulled? All of those are questions. Are there commands from the first testament that are still binding on us today? And are the 10 commandments that we read of in the Old Testament still binding on us? We're going to look at the specific question of the Sabbath and the questions about the calendar of the Sabbath, the seventh, which is the seventh day and which is the first day, and so forth. But you need to keep in mind the broader issue. The broader issue is, was there a change in the law? First of all, why was the Sabbath observed in the first place? And if you're going to talk with a Sabbatarian, this is an important point. In Deuteronomy 5, verse 12, the Sabbath was instituted as an observance of the deliverance from Egyptian bondage. Keep the Sabbath day in Deuteronomy 5 to sanctify it as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thine ox, nor thine ass, nor any of thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates, that thy manservant and thy maidservant may rest as well as thou. And remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord thy God brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore, the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. Notice that. That's an important passage. Write it down somewhere. The Sabbatarians are going to argue that the Sabbath day has been observed since creation and was observed because, lo and behold, Genesis says God rested on the seventh day. But that's not what he says in Deuteronomy. He says, therefore, because the Lord brought them out of Egypt with a mighty hand, therefore, because of this, the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day was instituted to celebrate that deliverance from Israel. It was commanded, wasn't commanded before then. There's no indication it was ever observed before then. It was commanded after they were delivered from Egypt. Deuteronomy 5. The Lord made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us who are all of us here alive this day. No, the Sabbath, part of that covenant, did not exist before this time, was not commanded. There's no record of any observance by Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and others during that period before Moses. There's no record of an observance of the Sabbath. Although Genesis records that God rested on the seventh day, that, of course, is written by Moses, which was after the patriarchal period. There's no record of observance for all those years. In fact, Nehemiah says, "Thou camest down upon Mount Sinai and spakest with them from heaven, and gavest them right judgments and true laws, good statutes and commandments, and madest known unto them thy holy Sabbath." What? I thought they knew about it the whole time, that it existed since the beginning of time. They knew about circumcision. They knew about all the requirements that Moses required of them. But here, thou madest known unto them on Sinai thy holy Sabbath, and commandedst them thy precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses thy servant. It only existed and came into existence on Mount Sinai. It was a sign between God and Israel. Who observed the Sabbath? Did everybody? If the Sabbath existed back in Genesis, there must be some proof that Abraham or that Adam and Eve and all of those others observed the Sabbath. No proof. We come up to Noah. Noah and his children get on the ark and then get off the ark. There must be proof that all those people, that's in Genesis, the 10th chapter, must be some proof that all those people from Noah on observed the Sabbath. But there isn't any. Because Exodus 31 says it's a sign between God and Israel. Israel didn't exist then. So speak thou unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep. It is a sign between me and you throughout your generations. Wasn't a sign with the Gentiles. Wasn't a sign with all the descendants of Noah. Wasn't a sign with all the descendants of all those people. Wasn't a sign for the descendants of Ishmael. It's the descendants of Israel. That ye may know that I am the Lord, that to sanctify you. Ye shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death. Whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. This didn't apply to the Gentiles, to the Greeks and the British and the Russians and the Chinese. It didn't apply to them. It only applied to his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest. Holy to the Lord, whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Didn't apply to all those other people. Didn't apply to the folks down in South Africa. Didn't apply to the American Indians. It didn't apply. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. It was not of any significance whatsoever between God and all the other nations, just between God and Israel. So it wasn't instituted from Adam until Moses. It did not exist. Wasn't required of anybody. Only required in part of the law. Now, do you remember what was required in Sabbath observance? So if the Sabbath is required today, then it's going to have to be the same sort of laws. First of all, you couldn't do any work. No work. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. The seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son nor thy daughter, thy maidservant nor thy manservant, nor thy cattle, nor the stranger that is within thy gates. I know for a fact some of you did some work today. Jonathan did. He was out. I saw him this morning. He was out shoveling the walk. Did you help him, Jason? You lily-livered bum. Get out there in the cold and shovel the walk occasionally. I know David sent people out to work. I know that there were people out spreading salt and doing that so you could get around on the roads and go to the stores and do all that sort of thing. You'd have to quit all that. No shoveling the walk. None of that stuff on Saturday. In addition, Exodus 35, verse 3, never light a fire in any of your homes on this day of worship. I bet all of you did that today. You had that furnace set, and you were really glad this morning to hear, oh, it's still working. We're not going to freeze to death in here. Excuse me, yesterday, if it had been this cold. You were glad to hear the furnace fire up. And more than that, you were really glad when you came in the house and you smelled that your wife had fixed you a delicious pie to go with the dinner, right? Your wife did fix you a delicious pie, right? Your wife did? You don't even have a wife. But you'd have to quit that. Nothing on Saturday. You can't cook. In addition, you can't bake or boil. He said to them, this is what the Lord said. Tomorrow is a day of worship. Now, you might sneak it in by saying, oh, well, I can use the microwave. Today is a day of worship, a holy day of worship dedicated to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save all that's left over and keep it until tomorrow morning. Couldn't bake. They could do it on Friday. They couldn't do it on the Sabbath. They couldn't bear any burden, couldn't lift anything. I see 2 or 3 of you women come and go, and every one of you, especially the ones with little kids, is carrying about 4 tons of stuff. I don't know if that's in the category of bearing burdens or not, but it's coming pretty close. Bear no burden, thus saith the Lord, take heed to yourselves. Bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. I saw my son David coming in this evening. We can imagine it would have been the Sabbath. He had a 50-pound bag of salt he brought in here for obvious purposes. He wouldn't have been able to bring that in. He'd have had to brought that in Friday because Saturday he couldn't bear any burden. And you've got to offer 2 lambs. Huh? No, wait a minute. On the Sabbath day, 2 lambs of the first year without spot and 2 tenth deals of flour for a meat offering, mingled with oil, and the drink offering thereof. This is the burnt offering of every Sabbath, besides the continual burnt offering and his drink offering. And you say, well, now, wait a minute. Well, they don't have the temple anymore. And the Sabbatarian argues, wait a minute, that's been taken away. Wait a minute. If that's been taken away, the Sabbath must be taken away. Where'd you get the idea that the laws regarding the Sabbath are taken away, but somehow or other the Sabbath is still binding? It doesn't seem like it works. But a lot of people argue because of that passage we read a moment ago in Exodus 31, verse 16, where it says the Sabbath was a perpetual observance. A lot of people argue that that means that the Sabbath was supposed to be observed forever. But I want you to notice, there are other perpetual observances in the Old Testament that not one Sabbatarian involves himself in. How do they get out of one and not the other? For instance, in Exodus 30 and verse 8, when Aaron lighteth the lamps at even, he shall burn incense upon it, a perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations. Well, now the Sabbatarian says, no, that's part of the ceremonial law and that's done away. It says it's a perpetual observance. And so perpetual is perpetual. It would have to always go on. You might notice Exodus 29 and verse 9. Thou shalt gird them with girdles, Aaron and his sons, put the bonnets on them, and the priest's office shall be theirs for a perpetual statute, and thou shalt consecrate Aaron and his sons. There should have been priests. There should be priests. It's a perpetual statute. Now, if there's some logic that you can use that gets rid of these perpetual statutes, that same thing will get rid of the perpetual Sabbath in Exodus 31 and verse 16. You might notice another one, Ezekiel 46. Thou shalt daily prepare a burnt offering to the Lord of a lamb of the first year without blemish. Thou shalt prepare it every morning. And thou shalt prepare a meat offering for it every morning, the sixth part of an ephah, the third part of a hin of oil to temper with fine flour, a meat offering continually by a perpetual ordinance unto the Lord. Thus shall they prepare the lamb and the meat offering and the oil every morning for a continual burnt offering. What happened to that? Well, somehow or another, the Sabbatarian argues that the ceremonial law was done away and what he wants to call the moral law still exists. How do you make that division? They're both described by the same terms, a perpetual observance. In 1 Kings 9 and verse 3, the Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever, and mine eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. That was the temple built by Solomon. What happened to it? What happened to it? The Lord said it's going to be there perpetually. Well, apparently, the word being used here does not mean eternally. The covenant was perpetual. This covenant of the Sabbath and these other items were perpetual as long as the covenant between God and Israel remained. If the covenant ceased, the perpetual elements of it would cease too. And that's an important thing to realize. If the covenant ceased, it's not perpetual anymore. The Sabbath, the whole book of Hosea prophesied the Sabbath was going to cease. Hosea 2, verse 11. I will also cause all her mirth to cease, her feast days, her new moons, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. Lord said, hey, they're going to cease. The covenant with Israel was disannulled. We can see that several places in the New Testament. Colossians 2. He blotted out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, that was contrary to us, took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. What was the handwriting of ordinances? Okay, right about here, the Sabbatarian says that was the ceremonial law. All those sacrifices and all those lambs and all that incense and stuff, that was done away, except for the fact that the passage goes on to explain some of the things that were involved. And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Let no man therefore judge you in meat, clean and unclean meats. And by the way, the Sabbatarians all keep a distinction between clean and unclean meats. There's not a one of them that's ever tasted pork since they became a Sabbatarian. Now, how in the world they think that's still part of the moral law, you let me know. Or in drink, or in respect of an holy day, or of the new moon. They say, hey, the new moon was part of the ceremonial law. We don't have to observe that anymore. Everybody except the Armstrong people, and they still keep the new moon. or of the Sabbath days. Whoa, there it is. What was included in that which was nailed to the cross, the handwriting of ordinances that was against us? The Bible's specific. He said, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. Now, the only thing that the Sabbatarians can do with that Sabbath day is they say, well, that's not the seventh day Sabbath. How on earth would I know that? It's other Sabbath. There were other Sabbath days. And those were all done away with. How would I know that? There's no distinction made in that passage. How would I know that some feast days are done away with and some are still in existence? Or that there's some meats that are still clean and unclean? How would I know that? You might also notice Romans 7, verses 1 through 7. Know ye not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the law, how that the law hath dominion over a man, so long as he liveth. For the woman which hath an husband is bound by the law to her husband, so long as he liveth. If the husband be dead, she's loose from the law of her husband. So then, if while her husband liveth, she shall be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, so that she be no adulteress, though she be married to another man. Wherefore, he's established a principle. Wherefore, my brethren, ye also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ. Oh, which law? Oh, just the ceremonial law. Just the ceremonial law. Okay, let's read on and see if this passage will make this clear. That ye should be married to another. Two laws, old one done away, married to another. Even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. But now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held. Oh, that's a ceremonial law. The ceremonial law was dead. Moral law still going on. That being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in the newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? Nay, I had not known sin, but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. Whoops, that's not the ceremonial law anymore. That's one of the 10 commandments. That would have to be describing the moral law, what these Sabbatarians call the moral law. Now, you and I still shouldn't covet, but not because the law said it, because Jesus Christ said it. But this defines the law that he's talking about, that the law of Moses used that expression, thou shalt not covet. So the one we're dead to is not some distinction between a ceremonial and a moral law. It's the law, period. That's an artificial distinction that the Sabbatarians are making. Hebrews 8, verse 6. Now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. If that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. Now, I met one time with a really nice young man who was a Sabbatarian. I believe I was in his home. And I asked him about this passage. Where does this passage make a distinction between a moral and a ceremonial law? All it talks about, I said, and this passage says, is a first and a second. Now, what was the first law? Was the first law ceremonial? Where do you get that idea? For finding fault with, he said, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. What was that covenant? Well, it certainly involved the Ten Commandments, didn't it? That was part of the covenant he made in that day, because they continued not in my covenant. Did they just refuse to keep the ceremonial law, or were they refusing to keep any of the law? And I regarded them not, saith the Lord. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind, write them in their hearts, will be to them a God. They shall be to me a people. They shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. I'll be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. In that he saith a new covenant, he maketh the first old. No distinction between ceremonial and moral. Just a first and a second, and the first has become old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. 2 Corinthians 3. If the ministration of death, what was that? What was that? Written and engraven in stones, was glorious. Whoa. Well, and I've asked him, what was written and engraven in stones? Could maybe you tell me? Well, the one I know about is the Ten Commandments. Usually the Sabbatarians say, well, there was some other thing that was written in a stone too. And that other thing, that part of the ceremonial law, that other thing, that was done away. What an odd expression. Written and engraven in stones, so that the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses. Now, you will find some other instances where things were written and engraven in stones, but it had no relationship to the face of Moses. The only thing written and engraven in stones that had relationship to the face of Moses was the Ten Commandments. It's the only one. Behold the face of Moses for the glory of his countenance, which glory was to be done away. How shall not the ministration of the Spirit be rather glorious, if the ministration of condemnation be glory? Do you suppose just the ceremonial law was the ministration of condemnation? For even that which was made glorious had no glory in this respect, by reason of the glory that excelleth. If that which is done away was glorious, much more that which remaineth is glorious. Seeing that when we have such hope, we use great plainness of speech, and not as Moses, which put a veil over his face. Only thing that was related to was that giving of the Ten Commandments. You're familiar with the passage. When he came down from Mount Sinai, that's all he brought with him on stones that time. There were some other times he put things on stones, but this identifies the stones being talked about. That the children of Israel could not steadfastly look to the end of that which was abolished. Now then, you need to realize that anybody who tries to be justified by the law of Moses is going to be severed from Christ. Galatians 5 says it clearly. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you that if you be circumcised, by the way, the Sabbatarians think that circumcision is still in effect. I, Paul, say to you that if you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised, he's a debtor to do the whole law. Just the whole moral law or the whole thing? Christ has become of no effect unto you. Whosoever you are justified by the law, you're fallen from grace. There was no indication. Now this is when you sit down with these folks, they're going to argue heavily from the year 300 and say, well, they decided to change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. And they have a difficulty talking with you and me because they say, don't you observe the Christian Sabbath? And I usually would say, oh, no. No, I don't. I don't observe the Sabbath, period. I don't care if you put it on Wednesday. I don't observe it. It's part of the law. It's been done away. And by the way, it was on the seventh day, and there was no indication it was ever changed. But many Protestant denominations are going to argue that the Sabbath was changed. Now, the New Testament doesn't ever say it was changed. You shouldn't ever say it was changed. It was always the seventh day. There's been no change in it. You don't observe the Sabbath. There's no requirement in the New Testament to observe the Sabbath. It's been done away. It wasn't changed to Sunday. I want you to think about the significance with me in just a few minutes that we have left of the Lord's Day. First of all, the Lord rose on the first day of the week. Now, the Sabbatarians have trouble with that. They say, no, that was really Saturday. But the problem is, Mark 16:9 says, when Jesus was risen early the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils. He met with the disciples on the first day of the week in John 20. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, while it's yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. The same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus, stood in the midst, and saith unto them, Peace be unto you. After 8 days again. What day would that be? Be another first day of the week. After 8 days again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace be unto you. So Jesus 3 times meets with the disciples on the first day of the week. The church was established on Pentecost in Acts 2. Perhaps you realize from Leviticus 23, verse 15 through 16, Pentecost always had to be on the first day of the week. It was 50 days after the previous Passover. It was actually 7 weeks plus 1 day. So if the Passover fell on Saturday, lo and behold, Pentecost had to be on the first day of the week. The Holy Spirit in Acts 2, the first 4 verses, came as Jesus had prophesied on the first day of the week. The gospel began to be preached on the first day of the week. The first day of the week is called the Lord's Day in Revelation 1:10. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. What on earth day is that, if not the first day of the week? In Acts 21:4, finding disciples, we tarried there 7 days. Why those 7-day periods? Who said to Paul through the Spirit that he shouldn't go up to Jerusalem. In Acts 20, verse 16, Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia. He hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. Why hurry? What was Pentecost? First day of the week. He was trying to get there to be with the Christians. In Acts 20 and verse 7, Christians assembled on the first day of the week. On the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached to them, ready to depart on the morrow. They didn't assemble on Saturday. They assembled on the first day. 1 Corinthians 16, there's a collection taken. Now, that's hard to do unless you're assembled. Collection for the saints, as I've given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. The breaking of bread was the chief purpose of that assembly. This was not to be forsaken. The Lord condemned it if it was forsaken in Hebrews 10. Now, yeah, I know it's cold. I know it was snowy this morning. I know it's difficult sometimes. But the Lord expects us to gather on the first day of the week and remember his death and his resurrection and his body given and his blood given. Let us consider one another to provoke unto love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. The expression, the first day of the week, means every first day of the week. Just like Sabbath meant every seventh day of the week. So, well, I assembled on one seventh day of the week, but it's been 2 months since I was here. Sorry, That's not assembling on the that's not assembling on the Sabbath in the Old Testament. Why do you think it would be assembling on the first day of the week in the New Testament? To say, well, I made it every other week or every month or every quarter, so that observance of the Lord's day should be in the spirit of it. Now then, this is the first day of the week. We've gathered here, many of us, most of us, a second time for the purpose of remembering the Lord's body and blood shed for us. We don't need to take a note of shame that there was in the Old Testament observance on Saturday, on the Sabbath. And we need to make some notes so that we can help other people to understand that. And so we can solve one more step of division that exists between people who claim they're Christians. If you're here tonight, we invite you to be a Christian, simply a Christian, and to do simply what they did in the New Testament. Believing, will you repent and confess and be baptized? Come while we stand and sing.